Mr Deputy Speaker, following on from my honourable friend for Gainsborough, I think it's worth just saying that very recently the Kiev International Institute for Sociology did a poll in eastern Ukraine and found that support for Russia had halved from 80% to 40% since the Donbass has effectively been evaded by Russia. And during today's debate, there's nobody in this chamber in today's debate, and I accept my honourable friend's argument that others have suggested it, but in today's debate nobody has stood up and said that Ukraine should be joining NATO. NATO is an argument, and my honourable friend says that it's music to the ears of President Putin, he can exploit that, but this country is a signatory to the Budapest Agreement of 1994, which allowed Ukraine to give up its nuclear arsenal and have its borders protected by Russia and by us and by other countries. And therefore, I would argue that we do have a responsibility to Ukraine that falls outside of the NATO alliance and our membership of NATO. And I think it is also worth putting on record in this House that there are many reports of ethnic cleansing of Tatars in Crimea. There are reports that 25,000 people have disappeared. There is a complete outside international media lockdown on any verification to be able to take place in Crimea. So again, following on from my honourable friend, Member for Isle of Wight's comment about the population of Crimea, I don't think it can simply be dismissed as saying that the people of Crimea want to remain in Russia, because I think there are many, many aspects here. And one thing which seems to, I think, have been overlooked so far in today's debate is that we talk about the geopolitical consequences of the grand strategy. We've not spoken about the consequences of the murder that is happening on the ground in various areas where Russia has a benign influence, whether that be Crimea, whether that be the Donbass, whether that be Georgia, whether that be Armenia, whether that be other regions. And I think that we should be careful not to soften how we're describing today. I will give way tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's just a quick point, but the Budapest Accord in 1994 didn't just refer to Ukraine, it also referred to Kazakhstan. And today, Russians have gone into Kazakhstan. So, and we've guaranteed the integrity, the sovereign integrity of Kazakhstan, by the way, if you look at the accords.
Yeah. And I'm grateful to my honourable friend because he reinforces the point I'm trying to make, that this is not just about should Ukraine join NATO, should we support Ukraine. It's that actually we have committed ourselves to other countries. And the debate today seems to be, well, tough luck, there's nothing we can do about it. But coming back to the grand strategy, I actually think that if we try and summarise overall what Russia's trying to achieve, I think the Eurasian Economic Community, the EAEC, formed in 2000, is really something that Putin holds very dearly. And the analysis is that that needs 250 million people to be able to work as a viable internal trading bloc, one which could then challenge other areas. And in order to achieve that, they need the 43 million Ukrainians and their powerful agricultural output to succeed. It also, when you look at who Moscow wants to bring into that pact, is effectively a neo-USSR. As has been said many times today, the idea that you bring to the table saying, well, effectively, all of the East European NATO countries must have all of their troops withdrawn, otherwise we're going to invade. Well, we have to stand up to that. We have to stand up to that. And my honourable friend for Riley and Wickford made a very, very important point about the political situation in the USA. And let us not forget that then Vice President Biden had an enormous fallout with President Biden about whether there should have been the surge into Iraq. He was always opposed to a lot of interventions that took place. And there is, if we know that in this House, you damn sure know that President Putin knows that, sat in Moscow, and will be making that analysis. And I come back actually to where all this started. This all started in the summer of 2013, when leading up to that, President Obama has said, you drop chemical weapons in Syria, it's a red line that we will not tolerate. They dropped chemical weapons in Syria, and he pretty much just wrote a stiff letter to the Washington Post. Now, at that point, okay, you can track exactly what happened. And it was within less than a year that President Putin walked into Crimea. And again, what did we do? Nothing. We didn't do anything. So I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Can I just very briefly remind him and the House what happened with the invasion of South Ossetia and Abkhazia in 2008? It was that President Bush moved I think it was the 6th Fleet into the Black Sea, ready to confront Russian aggression, and the invasion stopped. And it's that kind of response that we're going to need now. And of course, it's that kind of response which these two treaties are intended to preempt, and the hypersonic weapons are intended to preempt any possibility of happening.
And I'm most grateful to my honourable friend, and he reinforces the point I was making. And actually, this is where you get the Jekyll and Hyde, or if you like, the paradox of the President Trump. Because if you recall, in very early 2017, there was another chemical weapon attack in Syria. And within a very short space of time, the American administration under President Trump launched 26 Tomahawk missiles on strategic targets in Syria. And for the rest of that presidency, nothing else happened in that arena. However, the actions of President Trump exactly 1 year ago today was manna from heaven in Moscow, because again, the idea of undermining democracy and trying to undermine and destabilise the West and create those divisions in those societies is, I believe, one of the reasons why there is such ambiguity about whether the USA would actually support its NATO allies in Europe, because they're dealing with such a split society at home now that you could say that the Russian objectives over the last 10-15 years in the USA were sort of invited by President Obama, created by President Trump, and too much of a concern to really tackle them by President Biden. And we have to wait for those. And this debate shouldn't be about America. It's a different government entirely, but I'm afraid it is relevant to the conversation. And I think we have to accept a couple of things in this debate. My honourable friend for Shrewsbury often talks about Nord Stream 2, and he's right to talk about Nord Stream 2. But I don't believe for 1 second that Nord Stream 2 is going to be switched off or not commissioned. That is going to be switched on. And it is going to happen. And it's going to put the Poles and it's going to put people in Eastern Europe in a very difficult position. But that boat sailed 20 years ago. And we are where we are. I mean, we have tried. This country, the leadership of this country has tried to point out the folly of that. The NATO Parliamentary Assembly talks about this all the time. But I don't see that it's actually going to change. That's where we are today. So, we have to come to some conclusions, don't we? As the right honourable member for Worley said, the Cold War exists again. It exists. It started the moment that Putin walked into Crimea. The step change that took place in NATO, in Brussels, at the invasion of Crimea, changed the last 25 years of NATO policy from political, because it had obviously been a defence policy up to the fall of the Cold War. Then it decided it should be more of a political one. That changed everything, and it's now both political and defensive, but the progress that was made in a very short period of time, almost, if you will, in a panic about what happened, shows that we are back in a Cold War status, and NATO recognise that. But if we're in a Cold War status, then let's not even entertain this argument. People say we don't want another Cold War. It's there. Accept it. It's there. Now start to accept that we've lived through a Cold War. We lived through a Cold War for 50, 60 years. What did we do? Because surely everything is about counterbalance. As my honourable friend has just said, when the invasion of Georgia came, President Bush sent the 6th Fleet in, and that was a counterbalance reactive measure. It's why, as many of us, I draw across the House, recognise the importance of the renewal of Trident. It is about counterbalances. For those who say Trident will never be used, we know it's used every single day. It's a failure of policy if we actually fire the weapons, and by then none of us are going to care because we'll be at 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay? The reality is that that weapon works every day, and counterbalance is what we've got to do. And therefore, it comes to a very simple conclusion. This country, our constituents, especially the poorest in our constituencies, are suffering today from gas prices which are being manipulated from Moscow. That is a fact. Okay, and there was a big argument about what can the Treasury do to try and do this. Well, the reality is we're allowing these things to happen because we're not standing up. So there's a very simple message that needs to go to the Treasury today. In the Cold War, we spent 5% of GDP on defence. We cannot carry on with the levels of spending on defence that we spend today. It has to increase because we are back where we were 30 years ago. And unless we recognise that, and to expand my honourable friend for Gainsborough saying it's realpolitik, well, it is realpolitik. We're in the Cold War. We've got to increase defence spending. Counterbalance is the only way we're going to stop this situation escalating.
I'm afraid, as I say,